Are you looking to understand what RFD or rate of force development is? Well, in this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about improving your rate of force development with these specific exercises and training techniques. Let's get to it. Hey there, Brandon Splay here from Thirst Gym, and today I'm going to help you understand rate of force development and implementing it into your training. Rate of force development is incredibly important for athletic-based endeavors, trying to improve the amount of force that you output, making you a better athlete. Now, while rate of force development can certainly help strength sport athletes or just general people going to the gym, in general, it's usually used with athletic-based populations. So why would you use RFD or rate of force development training and understand it? Well, depending upon what athletes need, you can use certain aspects of rate of force development to aid their athletic performance. An example would be if you see athletes that have a lot of power, but they look like they have a hard time getting off the ground. They might be really bouncy, but that initial first step just isn't there. That's how quickly they're able to put force into the ground and immediately see movement. It can obviously be upper body work as well, but generally think about ground and what the feet are doing from a speed and jumping and athletic-based movement perspective. And rate of force development is going to be how quickly we can produce that force into the ground and express it into whatever kind of maneuver that we're doing. So that's going to explain what it is and why you need to improve it, because the better you are and the more rate of force development that you have, the higher and quicker that you are, the quicker you can likely go get things. And so an analogy I like to use for this is if you look at an acceleration of a car versus the top speed. A big engine might get you into incredible top speeds. If you think about some of the fastest cars in the world, like Bugattis or whatever, they are pretty quick. Don't get me wrong, they are quick, but they have to sacrifice that quickness for their top end speed, right? Because you're gonna have to put a big, massive engine in there. Where the quickest cars now are currently electric, and that would be your acceleration or your rate of force development. It's able to generate power instantly. And that's what you want as an athlete, be able to improve your power output being very fast, mixed with a good high-end, high motor. This is why you don't have to be the strongest athlete. You need to have one that has the greatest rate of force development, and that's going to give you all the success that you need in your athletic endeavors. And today, I'm going to help you improve that with these exercises. All right, so the first thing we got to do here before we actually give you those exercises, we got to be able to assess and let you know how can you find out if you need to improve your rate of force development. Now, there's never going to be a bad thing from doing it, but there's going to be some clear-cut ways to be able to tell if you need to do this. Now, one of my go-to ways to do this in my facility is using the vertical jump, okay? So you could take a Vertec or something like that, and you can get an athlete's vertical jump, and so / counter movement jump. And counter movement means that we're going to actually use our arms and legs, come down and jump up, or you can even use an approach-based jump. So what I like to do personally is just get a standing vertical jump, which looks at a small counter movement jump. They're able to go down, but they're not going to squat as much as you would, but it's going to give me a standing vertical jump leap. And that's going to let me see how much force can they put in the ground to be able to get up top. Now, a normal vertical jump test that you can do as well is hands on the side, and you're barely just going to bend, and then you're going to jump as high as you can. You're not going to get very high there. But again, that will let you see a true output of your rate of force development, and those numbers are never quite as big as a counter movement jump. But I like to just do a standing vertical jump because it gives me a good blend of a little bit of their counter movement, but also just what they can reach. But the other thing you can do here is add in an approach, and by an approach means we would go to take one step and then do that. And that's going to let the athlete store a little bit more elasticity. And so we can look at that difference, and whatever that difference is, that's a massive difference, then we can tell, okay, rate of force development needs to improve because they are pretty springy. They are reliant on the stretch shortening cycle to get their power. If those numbers are pretty close, then we know that their rate of force development in comparison to their springiness is pretty close. So we obviously want to improve their elasticity, but we can also improve the rate of force development at the same time and get those to move together. Okay, the best athletes usually have a good mix of both of those. They're not self-reliant on just one thing. The other thing we can look at is the broad jump. The broad jump is still going to use a counter movement piece because we're going to rip our arms down, hips are going to go back, but it lets it place things forward, and we're going to move our body forward in space. I like both because I like to see what athletes can do from a force production standpoint, which I think is more of the vertical jump side, and a force absorption standpoint, which I think is better for the broad jump because the more pliable and relaxed your body is, the more mobile you are, you can reach those legs out further and gain inches, even if you aren't the most explosive athlete, but it shows that you can absorb force well and get into good positions. So both have merit, right? But when it comes to assessing, I think you should do both, but you're gonna wanna look at the vertical jump in terms of creating that force initially, but test both. From a speed perspective, we wanna look at a 10-yard sprint. And again, because we're gonna have to start from a dead stop position, the quicker we're able to put force into the ground, the faster that 10-yard sprint's gonna be. We're not gonna be able to let them rely on that top end speed as we talked about with our car analogy, right? We're looking at just acceleration, and that's usually measured in the first 10 yards of anything that you do. These are gonna be relatively low times, but you're gonna find that the 10-yard sprint will let you look at that. The better that 10-yard sprint is, the better the rate of force development, okay? Also, we could do a mid-thigh pull with an isometric. This you will need force plates, and this is a fantastic way to do this because you're gonna get a maximum force output, and that's going to let you obviously see other metrics as well, but it's gonna give you that top-end force output. And obviously, as that number goes up, your athlete is creating more force, and therefore the rate of force that they're able to create is also gonna be higher, letting you see that. So you've got some different ways that you can test this. For most people, these top three are going to be your bread and butter because you can use a Vertec. Even if you don't have a Vertec, you could use a wall or something to be able to measure that. They even make apps nowadays. Broad jump, you just need a tape measure. A 10-yard sprint, you just need 10 yards and a stopwatch. If you got lasers like we use, that's much better. It takes the stopwatch timing out of it, but you get the idea how you can do it. And this would be more of a clinical-based setting, although mid-thigh pulls and force plates are getting more common in strength conditioning facilities, so use one if you have one. All right, let's now get into the exercise that you can do to improve your rate of force development. And the first group that I like are ballistic-based activities. And so these are going to be athletic-based movements, and they are going to be fast, repetitive, and they are going to look ballistic in nature, why they have the name. The common ones that I like are doing weighted jumps, trap bar or hex bar jumps, different types of med ball throw variations, and plyometric push-ups. These are kind of like the big four that I like. I'm gonna tell you why here in a second. So when it comes to doing these, we obviously want a little bit of weight because we want to be in that 30 to 60% range in terms of the load that we're using for this to optimize our rate of force development. So that gives you an idea of what we want to have in terms of loading scheme. Now adding your weight to that can make that a little bit complicated, but the goal that I want you to understand here is we don't want it stupid light, but we also don't want it really heavy. We want it kind of in that middle range here. That's why I like weighted jumps because it's going to keep us grounded, but also from a weighted jumps perspective and the trap bar perspective, I like to make sure that these are done what's called a dead stop. And this is going to work in particular more on that rate of force development, and meaning that we're not going to just continue to keep bouncing as we do something. We are going to jump as high as we can. I've got the dumbbells on my hand, jump as high as I can, stop, and then do that again, and working on creating that force as much as possible with the weight that we have. Trap bar would be the same thing. The thing I like about the trap bar is it can be at the dead stop in that position, and we can just push through the floor and come up. Again, you want to make sure that the weights are relatively light here on those. You don't want your super heavy trap bar weights, but you get the idea. Being in that power-based position with the high handles is perfect for athletics, and it's going to teach you to do that. We can also do different med ball throw variations, and so this could be laying on our back, throwing up as high as we can, catching and stopping, working on pushing that, or we could do it with a partner here as hard as I can, catch it, make sure I'm stopping each one, okay? We can do also different throwing variations. So we can take the ball here, start in our back pocket, and then just throw rather than actually coming back and loading. We can start in that loaded position, and that's going to work on our rate of force development sideways and rotationally. And then also our plyometric push-ups are fantastic here. Again, using more of a dead stop. So we'd start from the bottom, and we would just push up as high as we can, stop. And the goal is to break that up, and that's going to really focus on the rate of force development. So for majority of these exercises, I really like doing these a lot for 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps. If you're staying in that range, you're going to do a good job of making sure you're not developing power, and adding in these dead stop derivatives of them is going to make sure that you increase your rate of force development with these ballistic-based activities. All right, the second group of movements that I like here for improving rate of force development are Olympic weightlifting-based movements, or what I call weightlifting-based movements. These are all going to look familiar to you. The snatch, the clean, the jerk, the pulls, and the different kettlebell variations that you're going to do. So what these do is when we go to actually push through the floor and provide the power for these exercises, it's going to improve the rate that we get from the ground. So the snatch and the clean are very common from the weightlifting community. We know that anybody that snatches and cleans a lot of weight, they obviously produce a lot of force, a lot of power. You go to measure their vertical jumps, they're usually better than a lot of professional athletes because the amount of load that they're using is moving incredibly quick, and the rate of force that they're having to create is really going to maximize into doing to do like a vertical jump or rod jump. We talk about the assessment protocol. So from the snatch and the clean perspective, just normal programming, whether you're doing different kind of pull variations or you're doing different complexes, they are all vital. I think doing pulls and cleans off of blocks works better than anything else for improving rate of force development, in particular for athletes. But as long as you're doing snatch and cleans and your variations, you're going to be checking that box. And then with your jerks and your push presses, the same thing, but we're going to implement that from an upper body perspective. The loads are going to slow us down in that nice 30 to 60% range. You know, you can certainly go heavier if you were focusing on the weightlifting, but if we're looking at improving athletic performance, staying in that 30 to 60% range and making sure that this barbell is moving quickly will do a lot for your upper body strength. And then we also want to focus on pulls. So not only do we want to focus on catching the snatch and catching the clean, all fantastic things, but when it comes to the pulls, we can actually load these up more and we can actually be violent and explosive, and we don't have to worry about catching it. So the big thing with athletes is that while the weightlifting movements can be fantastic, there is technique and it does take time and it does take a lot of reps. So depending upon how your training is organized or how long you're working with an athlete, if you have a very short time, many times you can get very similar outcomes by just focusing on pulls themselves. But understand that I do like to use pulls as well as the full derivatives through different cycles of the year, depending upon what's going on. You also see in football, very commonly, pulls in season are great because they're going to keep the wrist, elbows, and shoulders feeling good because we do have to worry about pushing and pulling and tackling people. So we have to think that these are just a method to get the outcome that we want, and pulls seem to show a lot of benefits and a lot of similar things that we get from the snatch and the clean. So don't be scared to use heavy pulls to work on your rate of force development. And the other thing I also like in this movement is kettlebells. Kettlebells are very ballistic in nature with those other movements that we kind of talked about, but we can focus on doing unilateral based variations, which can be beneficial for many athletes, increases your trunk strength, and we also can do different flows and different variations there as well and still get that triple extension based work when it comes to doing kettlebell snatches or kettlebell cleans, using our hips and focusing on the rate of force development from that side. So these are kind of where you want to be with your weightlifting stuff. When it comes to your programming, it's really going to depend on kind of what you're trying to get out of them. Generally speaking though, with all your weightlifting based stuff, you're almost always going to want your reps 5 or less, and then ideally more in like that 1 to 3 rep range because they are so technical and you can focus on pushing as much rate and as much force into the ground as possible, kind of what we're talking about here today in general. And that will let you be able to do that over and over. So therefore your number of sets can increase. You can do 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 sets. You're doing like 8 sets of pulls or 8 sets of clean pulls or snatch pulls. You can do those essentially all day and really work on that rate of force development. So your volume should come more from your sets than your reps with your weightlifting based movement. And if you do that, this is going to be a surefire way to improve your rate of force development after you've done the ballistic based work in a training program. All right, the third thing I like to focus on here are plyometrics. And now plyometrics can somewhat fall underneath that ballistic based movement as we talked about, but generally these are almost always going to be body weight in nature. And the 5 most common ones that I personally like to use are different depth drop variations, hurdle hops, box jumps, bounding, and reactive based work. And so depth drops work great in terms of teaching us our landing mechanics. And in generally, we're gonna have that depth drop being higher, okay, and then we're going to focus on absorbing that force, but then going over something else again. So we will usually, to improve rate of force development, what you want to have is a very high depth drop because that's going to focus on having you on the ground longer, and that longer amortization phase is then going to help you work on your rate of force development. You're also going to get stretch shortening cycle benefits as well, but that long time spent on the ground is kind of what we're after to be able to recreate that force to get over either the next hurdle or the next object or whatever athletic based movement you're doing, right? So that's where depth drops can really come in handy, is that they, again, exacerbate that amortization phase. The hurdle hops, however, are generally going to be more athletic in nature. They are going to be more basically underneath like a reactive based work. I'll talk about these a little bit different, what might be different, but hurdles can be great because we can focus on that initial jump, but then now we're going to have to stay springy and continue to get it. So Hurdles, one, you can use it in two ways. You can have just a massive one height hurdle and try to get the massive amount of height that you can. That's really going to focus on just the rate of force development side, but we can pair that with other hurdles as well and get the stretch shortening cycle involved as well. So it's a great 2-for-1. Box jumps, especially seated box jumps, do a fantastic job of improving rate of force development because your feet are already on the ground. The box is going to take the stretch shortening cycle away, and we just have to create as much force from the box to jump up onto the next box. You can do regular box jumps as well and get a small counter movement that is also acceptable. But box jumps, in particular seated ones, are the best for improving rate of force development. It's one of my go-tos for athletes to be able to teach them how to not only do box jumps well, especially the younger ones, but immediately improve their rate of force development and immediately pick up on some quick gains. The other thing I really like here is bounding and different bounding variations, both lateral and forward. The lateral ones are great because we usually start on one leg, go to jump on the other one, and have to be able to create that force from side to side. Great for moving in the frontal plane, which most athletes need to do, especially when it comes to change of direction. But you can also do forward bounding variations as well, and those are more short sighting oriented, you will find that you can also do these with a dead stop as well if you would like. And then the reactive based stuff is just going to be taking any kind of plyometric based drill and combining them and getting multiple things. So this could be doing different lateral hops, mix in with broad jumps, mix in with box jumps, mix in with hurdle hops. You can do multiple broad jumps together. These are usually, again, better for stretch shortening cycle, which still overall benefits the rate of force development, but I like to make sure that we're doing something that's still athletic, and always that first thing that you're doing is usually going to still work on your rate of force development. So this is a nice blend. Most of these are just focused on going after the rate of force development early, but you can see how you can mix these in together to also improve your stretch shortening cycle, giving you, again, better overall athleticism with everything else that we've talked about. All right, the fourth thing I really like to make sure I do here for rate of force development is use of accommodating resistance. Now, my first caveat here will be you want to make sure your athlete is advanced enough to use accommodating resistance. You don't just want to use bands and chains on things just because, there might be lower hanging fruit that we can go after to improve their performance. So that's the first and foremost. But if you do have, older high school based athletes, collegiate athletes, professional athletes, people that have long training history, you can definitely use accommodating resistance or bands and chains, and I would highly encourage you to do so. So the first thing I want you to understand here about accommodating resistance, and in particular bands, is that bands have what are called overspeed eccentrics. And what that means is because the bands are constantly pulling, whether we're squatting, whether we're bench pressing, we're deadlifting, whatever we're doing, the bands are pulling faster than the force of gravity. And so that's an overspeed aspect, and the muscles will feel that pulling is faster, and that's going to get a faster stretch shortening cycle. And so that can be great for improving the stretch shortening cycle, improving power output, improving athleticism, all great things. But you gotta understand that's the difference between bands, and therefore that makes band training harder to recover from than chain training. So you have to ask yourself what you're trying to get out of it, what you're kind of cycling with your exercises, because that will determine on how much bands you want to have, but also what you're using, whether you can get away with chains or bands with what you're doing. The second thing is going to be, obviously, we do want bands and chains, but not only just independently on the lifts, like your squat, your bench press, and your deadlift. Again, all great things. We use those in our facilities for sure, but we can also use bands and chains for different plyometric-based exercises or even weightlifting-based exercises if you really wanted to. So how you use them can vary quite a bit. So we like doing different band-resisted jumps, and from a split squat, or even from a double leg or a single leg or pogo hops. The pogo hops are definitely more of a ballistic based thing, but you get an idea that we use bands for more than just the lifts. We use them on our plyometrics and our ballistic based work as well. The bands I like because, again, it's harder because they're pulling down. That counter movement jump's going to give you a little bit of overspeed, but if you even do them from a dead stop, the bands are going to constantly pulling down the entire time, where the chains aren't going to do that. So we like to do a lot of different banded jumps, but you can also use them as assistance as well to be able to overcome and get athletes new to newer heights and help them with that as well. We'll talk about that when we get to the French contrast stuff. Chains, however, they deload into the ground. So usually you're going to see these more on your squat, your bench press, and your deadlift variations. And again, we can still press as fast as we can, squat as fast as we can, deadlift as fast as we can. And what that's going to do is allow us, again, to create more force. Now, the chains and the bands work great when it comes to like the squat. If we do a box squat, that way we get that break in between the box. So we're going to break up the eccentric and the concentric with the box. Static overcome by dynamic is what Louis Simmons calls it. And really that's great for improving lower body rate of force development. The deadlift by itself, because you have to lift the bar off the ground, is naturally going to improve rate of force development. So bands and chains work pretty good here as well. I usually tend to lean towards chains on my deadlifts and bands on my squats, but that's just me. That's because there's the eccentric phase of the squat. Bench press, you can get away with either one as well for your upper body based power. You can also perform these off of pins or with dead stops on your chest or off boards to focus not only on certain ranges of motion, but to focus on more rate of force development of letting that bar actually stop and getting a big push, helping you improve your power that way. Now, the other thing that you can use accommodating resistance for is the French contrast method. And this is very, very common, especially more in like collegiate and professional athletics, because it's tried and true and it does work. It will improve vertical jumps and broad jumps and athleticism, but you can't run French contrast training all year round. You have to save it and kind of milk it for when you need it, and then pull back from it and kind of keep it in your back pocket for when you need immediate performance damage, because it's pretty much guaranteed. And it's going to alternate between not only weighted jumps, but band assisted jumps or band resisted jumps and heavy strength training. So we're going to put those together in a certain sequence. I'll have it linked in the description box below for you of everything you need to know about French contrast training. I've got a very detailed video on that, so I'm not going to go into all the details, but how you order your exercises can then give you certain outputs. And you do need accommodating resistance for the French contrast method to be optimized. In my opinion, you can probably get away without it, but most people are going to do band assisted jumps or band assisted lifts to some degree to maximize that. So you do want to make sure you're using accommodating resistance if improving rate of force development is definitely of utmost importance for you. All right, the fifth thing that I really like using are isometrics and other different variations or intensity techniques. So I've got three here that I personally like to use for myself, that I use with some athletes here and there, more of the advanced athletes. So again, this is more of an advanced method, but something worth considering. The first one is the isometrics, and more so pin pulls and pushes into pins. So what you do is you essentially take your pin system in your squat rack and you would actually perform your pin pull like you're doing the testing. Okay, so we would pull that isometrically as hard as we can, and then we would immediately follow that up, and then we would actually go pull like a deadlift or a clean pull with a similar weight, and that's going to actually teach our body to pull through that position. And you're going to see an increase in the rate of force that you can do because you're priming your nervous system with those heavy isometrics, and then you're going to perform it ballistically. And it is essentially a form of post-activation potentiation, or this PAP-based work. So you can certainly do this without the isometrics, but the isometric piece does take it up a notch. And you can also just perform these as holds as well. So you can do isometric holds off the chest, and that time under tension is then going to improve your rate of force development because you're going to get stronger in usually those vulnerable dead stop positions like pause squats or different pause deadlifts or pause bench presses off of certain areas, or even like a pause overhead press down here. All are viable things that you could do, but having that lengthened time and the isometric is shown to improve rate of force development. But the post-activation potentiation, or the PAP training, what that basically means is we're going to take a heavy weight like a front squat, a deadlift, a back squat, a bench press. We're going to perform a major compound movement, usually in the mid to high 80% range for like 2 to 3 reps. And then we're going to follow that up with a light-based movement, usually body weight or very light weights of a similar plane-based movement. So some combinations that I really like are doing a front squat or a back squat supersetted with a vertical jump or a seated box jump, something of that nature. With my bench press, it's almost always some kind of bench press superset with some kind of push-up variation or a band-assisted push-up variation if people don't have quite enough power to make their push-ups look explosive, or we elevate their hands. And then with your deadlift, I usually like doing a trap bar deadlift, again with either a vertical jump or a broad jump variation. Those are kind of my 3 go-to gold standards. So when it comes to doing these, the pin pulls and isometrics and the holds, usually 6 seconds is the longest that I like to go with these. With the holds just themselves, 2 or 3, but the pin pulls, especially if we're going into the post-activation potentiation, I like these to be incredibly long and grueling, because then you'll notice when you actually go to do the ballistic movement, you're going to get more out of it. The post-activation potentiation, again, is something that you want to kind of save, kind of like the French contrast method. You don't want to do this every single week in and week out, 52 weeks out of the year. You're going to ebb and flow it whenever you feel like you've hit a rut, or you kind of need to get through a sticking point or a plateau, especially when it comes to like improving your vertical jump or your broad jump, then post-activation potentiation is a fantastic thing to get you out of that, because you can run it for anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks and really try to just improve that strength movement just a little bit, a couple percentage points each week, and then maybe increase or keep your volume pretty close to the same with what you're doing, and you should start to see your vertical and your broad jump and things like that increase because of the improved neural output from these intensity-based techniques. All right, to wrap things up, I want to make sure I take home with you some key things here to understand about rate of force development training. So we want to make sure that first and foremost, out of all the stuff that we're talking about, that the quality of the work that you're doing supersedes the quantity. Okay, when it comes to power training, speed agility training, plyometric training, weightlifting based movements, the quality is definitely more important, because we can't just do reps on end, then our quality suffers, and therefore we're not only building bad movement patterns. We understand that we're trying to make sure we get performance enhancement out of this. So this is a means towards an end, and by having better quality of work, better quality jumps, better quality landing, better quality mechanics of the work that we're doing, better technique during our snatches, our cleans, our jerks, focusing on those before we push the weights too hard, and or the quantity of them will be there. And you also just want to make sure that you're not trying to pound yourself on the ground with some of these things as well. You also want to make sure that if you do good quality of this paired with just general strength training in general, you're going to see a better return on your investment than you just do these by themselves. You also want to make sure that you have ample rest. And by that, I mean you want to have ample rest between each set that you're doing, because it is, again, focusing on quality and we're focusing on power output and the energy substrate that's used. Having adequate rest, to be able to give the best effort that you have in every single rep and every single set is about most important to get the most out of it. It's going to let you maximize on this quality side, but also it's going to give you the adequate recovery to be able to recover from your training, not only during the workout, but after the fact when you start stacking your weeks together in your training blocks. And we also want to make sure that you're giving yourself ample time. Okay, this is not something that you can do just 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and immediately see progress. If you're very new to it, you might feel better and you might notice a little bit better of improvement, but this is ideally something that's going to take time to improve upon. 8, 10, 12 weeks ideally is what you kind of want to give yourself before you would go to reassess some of your numbers, like we talked about, your vertical jump, your broad jump, your 10-yard split, or that mid-thigh pull, or you're using force plates or what have you. So if you keep all these in mind, you're making sure you follow some of the sets and rep parameters that I gave you, as well as giving yourself a pare down of this with just general quality strength training. So your front squats, your back squats, your bench press, your deadlift, your rows, right? If you're doing all those kind of things with what you're just trying to focus on, just your rate of force development, and still trying to improve your stretch short side ankle at the same time. So don't neglect that by any means, but you do want to make sure that you're doing all this. You will see progress over the long term, and your workouts in general should take 45 to 60 minutes to be able to get done. If they're starting to drag out, you're probably doing more than what you need to, and you're then chasing that quantity over the quality. So that's all I've got here for today's video. If you haven't had any specific questions when it comes to rate of force development, just let me know in the comment section below. I'd also really appreciate if you hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you at the next video.